Welcome to the Wild Hope Rising podcast. We're your hosts, Sunny Kane and Tammy Clotton, and we're so glad you stopped by. We want to help you be wildly you, and believe it or not, you're already her. We invite you to gather around the table with us. We'll help you move through your wilderness season, no matter how you got here. So lean in, let's ignite your purpose, and discover what you're made of. Buckle up, my friend. It's time for Wild Hope. Well, hey friends, welcome back to the podcast. We're so glad you're here. Before we dive in today, Tammy and I have been so excited because over the past couple of days, we have heard from some of you ladies as you are listening to Wild Hope Rising. And I don't know about you, Tammy, but my favorite one was hearing from Kyla that she is listening to us on her lawnmower. How fun is that?
And she said that's where she meets with Jesus, is when she's mowing her lawn and listening podcasts. I loved hearing that story.
And it's like every time we say, you might be on the treadmill, you could be in your office, you might be in your car. Now we're going to say, or on your lawnmower.
Right.
Yes. So we heard from Kyla, and she is just a woman who's walked through wilderness seasons and is really relating to what we're talking about here, as well as we heard from Autumn. Autumn, we loved your voice text, hearing that this is resonating with you in the middle of your wilderness season. And we got 5 reviews this week on Apple, and that's a big deal, isn't it, Tammy?
Yeah. And if you guys don't know the value of reviews, it's really important, not just to tell us you like us. That's not what it's about. It really is that we're trying to get this message out to women. And so if you would rate and review us, it helps to kind of bump that up so that people see us, and women who need hope can find hope because you are helping them get that.
I love it. And you know what's so cool is, ladies, we know that we're building a table here where women who are in wilderness seasons can come together in realness of bringing who we are to the table, finding common values, even though we might not agree on everything. And what I love about this is when you reach out to us, that helps us know you're sitting here at the table. So please let us hear from you. We record these from our homes. We're looking at each other, but we're imagining you sitting here with us. But we've also seen in some of the stats, this has been astounding to us, that we've got women who have downloaded this podcast in Belgium, in the UK, and where else?
Ireland, and one other Australia. Yeah.
Oi, matey. I don't know. Smart pirate voice in Australia, but well, let's get to it today. Friends, we've been in a Hope Dud series, and if this is your first time with us, we want to welcome you. You can always go back and catch these podcasts, but a Hope Dud, it's these things that we quietly lean on, hoping that they're going to carry us, that they'll fulfill us, that they'll keep us steady. But in the end, they just don't hold. They leave us more disappointed than they do grounded, and they're the things that look like they should deliver hope, but they don't. And so far, we have talked about self-help culture. We've talked about performance. We've talked about the boo, which is the big opinions of others. And today, we're going to be talking about relationships. And when we talk about this, we're talking about even the good relationship, because here's the truth. Sometimes we put our deepest hope in the people closest to us, whether that be our spouse, our kids, our friends, or even our church. And for those of you who are single ladies, I know you might not have a spouse. I know you might not have children, but you have people close to you that you are tempted to put your hope in. So follow along today. Even if we're talking about a spouse and the kids, we are talking to the single ladies as well. But in these relationships, when they let us down, we feel shattered in this area. Relationships are really hard when we have placed our hope in them. And it's not because the people are bad, okay? But it is because a human being was never intended to hold that kind of weight. So today, Tammy and I are going to be getting real. We're going to be talking about how our hope can quietly shift from God to people, and why that sets us up for disappointment, and what it looks like to really anchor ourselves in the one who never fails us. So let's dive into this conversation. I really want to get into this, and I want to start here. Tammy, have you ever realized that you were placing your hope in a relationship? Maybe that was your spouse, maybe it was a friend, maybe it was your child, and you found it just didn't quite hold up. And what did that look like for you?
Well, I've had too many of these stories, but one that kept coming to my mind when we were talking about this was when my husband and I were first married. Now we've been married for almost 38 years, and we are very different people. I am an extrovert, and he is a true introvert. And so when we were first married, I wanted to be at the church and do all the things, and he wanted to go, but then go home as soon as possible. And so at the small church that we were a part of, they had these potlucks after church. And that is like an introvert's worst nightmare. So, introverts, I see you. Um, and I have to confess that I wanted people to approve of me and think that I had this great, marriage and it was all spiritual and all of these things. And so I went by myself, and the little older ladies said, "Well, where's your husband?" And I said, "Well, he's at home." "Well, why isn't he here with you? He should be here with you." And I'm sorry, I'm not mocking. That was how animated they were about it. And so I went home feeling bad, put the pressure on him, like, "You really need to come to these potlucks." And he's like, No, I'm not going." He was very adamant about it. And occasionally he would humor me and come. Until the last time that one of the ladies asked me where he was and he wasn't there. And I just heard this little whisper from God that said, "He's a big boy and he can decide that for himself. He doesn't need your help." Yikes. But I actually said that to the ladies, which was a big deal for me because I really wanted their approval. And so for me, it was disappointing. I thought my husband should be a pastor. Um, Turns out at that very same little church that the pastor of the church said, women can be pastors too, because he saw something in me. And God used that years later to say, "I need you to step into this. I want you to. This is who I created and designed you to be because of this heart that you have that I entrusted you with." But man, I was convinced it was supposed to be my husband. Um, and God knew better. And so taking that pressure off of the the relationship and the marriage and beginning to accept him for who he is, and also showing up for who I am and not hiding behind my marriage or hiding behind, what people think of it or that kind of thing. And so that's definitely, I put my hope in that he was going to do these things and then people would approve of me.
Yeah, and don't you think in this area, like when you're bringing this up, what I keep going to in my mind is these ideals that we kind of grab a hold of, that it's the ideal of what the marriage will look like, of what will look like to other people because of that approval that you're talking about. But that ideal is almost the thing that causes us to romanticize the look of how the marriage will be. And when we find ourselves in the midst of marriage and it's not exactly what we thought it would look like, that is really disappointing. And this is a place that I want to say that part of this is those ideals are sometimes shaped by society themselves. And this is a newsflash for you. Jerry McGuire lied. He lied when he came out and he said to Renee Zellweger, this is Tom Cruise and Renee. And so we might be aging ourselves here. Like if you are a young one, you're like, who the heck is Jerry McGuire? Google it. You got to watch the movie. But the premise is this idea of another human being, you complete me. And that has built an ideal that in your marriage, you will be completed. All of your ideals and the romantic version of what you thought it would be, like you and your husband going to church and having the potlucks, never mind the germaphobe's nightmare. That's not just an introvert's nightmare. I am like,
That's
what
true.
does your kitchen look like? And what the heck, where's your mayonnaise been? I mean,
Right. For sure.
but in this, Jerry Maguire lied, and never mind the fact, Tammy, that what does that cultural ideal say about a woman who is not married?
Right. Well, culture puts and especially in the church, right? We put a lot of pressure on people to be married. Um, and we just want to say to you right now, if you are not married, have no desire to get married, whatever, um, that you are still a whole person. You have your own set of gifts and strengths and everything that you need to show up as the whole person that you are and not wait for someone else. If you're married and you're waiting for the other person to complete you, you are a whole person in and of yourself, and you have gifts to share with the world. You have strengths, you have knowledge, you have wisdom, you have all kinds of things. You do not need another person to complete you. Jerry McGuire lied.
He lied. He absolutely lied. And it's a reason that we often put our hope and too much hope in our marriage. And one thing I just want to say here is I really believe that as humans, we do the best that we know how to do. And then when we know better, we do better. And so I can look back at these past versions of myself and really see where I also looked to not only my marriage, but just people in general to rescue me,
Mm.
to complete me. I looked to other people for my security or my stability. I looked to their acceptance or approval of me as certainty. And anyways, I think that we put so much hope in relationships. And when I think of, I'll bring this into my own life a little bit, but I think that I have done this one of two ways. And one we could go into that will be kind of funny, but the story that was coming to mind while you were talking is my husband and I got in a really big fight several years ago. And I can't even remember what it was about. Isn't that how most big fights are? You have no idea. You just know it was big. And I had this expectation, this desire, this belief that the remedy in marriage would look like my husband coming and kind of rescuing me from those big, hard feelings rather than me regulating myself. And that he would offer me words of affirmation. That's my love language, that he would say, I'm so sorry. You deserve better. I shouldn't have said that. Fill in the blank. I wanted him to tell me how wonderful I was, right? Like maybe there was some ego involved, Tammy, but I remember we didn't talk for a few days after this explosion of a fight. And silently, my husband was building this pantry door in our kitchen. And every day he was hammering on it and we would pass each other. I'd grab my coffee and storm by him like, he's not offering me words of affirmation and he's just hammering his door. How dare he? This pantry door got finished and it was so beautiful. And I remember it was this small little voice that just said to me, aren't you glad that you have a husband that doesn't just say he's sorry, but one that shows you he actually is? And I looked and what I saw, I wanted a pantry door. I hated the one we had. It was those old accordion style, nerdy looking ones. And so my husband found something that I was desiring, and his sorry was being poured through his work. And there I was, like a toddler, stomping around for an entire week, demanding words of affirmation. All of my hope was in them. And yet my husband was expressing sorry through his acts of service. And I think when we're putting our hope in relationships, a lot of it is wrapped around this idea of our expectations of how it should look, or it is about that ideal. I mean, can you relate to that?
Oh yeah, the ideal part in my family, especially was centered around once again people approving of me with how my kids behaved, how they dressed, how they acted and talked, and all of these kinds of things, and including my husband too. But I know that when my girls were teenagers, they went through a goth phase, and so they wore all the dark things, and um, looked scary to the average Christian church youth group. Um, but I also knew stuff that they were going through that other people didn't know. And And so just tried to love them and accept them. And at the same time, um, I knew that I was being judged as a parent. And I had people come to me with concern and people coming to me with, how I should make them do it different and all of those kinds of things. And and then as we have grown, they've gone through different things and they have made choices that are different than mine and different than the church would hope or expect. And I had this ideal family in my head, and our family doesn't look like that.
Mm.
And it's for a lot of different reasons. And I
And
had
would
to,
you say,
yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt you there, but you talk about just the way people were, about how you had to wrestle with the way people were maybe judging you based off of those decisions. Was there fear of the judgment of others? And what did that fear sound like for you?
Oh, sound like there w there was definitely fear, but it was more like I was afraid of being rejected, of not being approved of, that I would be kind of shoved to the outskirts of, I wouldn't be allowed to serve. I love to volunteer and all of those kinds of things, and so there was those kinds of fears.
So if your kids weren't a certain way,
Yep,
that of what was deemed acceptable, the ideal to perhaps the Christian community,
yep,
or, in this, it's easy because we're talking about in the church, but really this is if your kids are not acceptable to the world around you and they do not fit the mold, then what does that say of me? This is something I think what you're bringing up is you're speaking of what was your experience, but I think this is common. You
oh, and it
know,
goes even deeper than this, right? So a lot of times it's our kids need to have a certain profession, career. They need to have completed school and college and all of these kinds of things, or they needed to behave a certain way and not do drugs and all of that kind of thing. And your kid is in jail. Your kid didn't finish school. Your kid is struggling with depression. Your kid is even suicidal or has a mental health challenge. Maybe they have a developmental challenge, and you're never going to fit in places that your kid's not accepted because they have special needs and I mean, there are so many layers to this.
well, and you even think, your kid in today's day and age, your kid could be struggling in their sexuality. What
Yes.
does it look like if they're wearing a certain outfit? I mean, I can think of when my daughter went to youth group and she went in and wore a tank top, right? Like with a sweatshirt over the top of it. I didn't think anything of this. And I remember she walked down the hallway and she overheard two people talking in the kitchen that said, "Hey, can you believe she used to be a pastor's daughter wearing a shirt like that? Her cleavage is showing." And what's interesting is what that did in my daughter, but what it did in me and the grapple that I had as a result of that. I'll let my daughter's story be her story on what that caused in her heart. But when it first came up, I mean, I have always raised her in believing that modesty was an issue of the heart, right? That it was about the motives that she had and the way that she was carrying herself. In other words, if she's acting really sexual, maybe a low tank top might not be a great idea. Well, my daughter, if you know her, she is just sweet as can be, and she has a heart. She loves the Lord. And when I saw her leave that day, I thought nothing of her tank top. But for one brief second, when she brought me this feedback, I thought, well, have I been raising her wrong? Should I have had her wear a different outfit? I went on a spiral in my mind because does her outfit look like what the expectation of what a Christian should look like or what a, whatever. And I think that this is just one place. I mean, I can just think of goodness, sporting events where you watch parents put so much pressure on their child's performance. And if the child does not succeed, it's like we're really excited when we have the superstar kid. My kid is the top wrestler in the state. But what if your child hung in there for an entire season without giving up and never, ever won one match? Are you just as proud because they're developing resilience? Or do you feel a level of shame in bringing into conversations with other parents because your child didn't fit. And really, that's not about your child. It's about you. It's about you putting your hope in the expectations of others.
Well, and I keep thinking, like, sometimes we use our families as a badge of honor, right? And the pressure that we put on each other in that sometimes can be crippling. And what if instead we stop the judgment? We stop pressuring one another to say, here, this is how my marriage is achieving, this is how my kid is achieving, all of that kind of thing. And we start supporting one another as they move through the different seasons of their life and just encouraging one another. I mean, seriously, we put so much pressure on one another and ourselves. And then as a result, we start trying to control our families. And so we try to exert control, coerce them into doing what our dream is for them, for our family, all of that kind of thing, instead of meeting them right where they're at and accepting them for who they are. Of course, calling each other forward to be our best selves, but not so that I look good.
Mm.
Not that I have this badge of honor, this trophy. Kids are not trophies. They're human beings to love.
Boy, I just almost want to let that linger for a minute because I think that in our quest to put our hope here of looking at other people, even other people's opinions, right? This is one way that we put, and I know we talked that on a previous episode of the boo of the big opinions of others, but this is also where we put our hope in our relationships. In other words, if I'm looking for approval, if I'm looking for your acceptance, then I can turn my kid into a trophy and then you'll be happy. So my hope is in my kid here, but it's also in your opinion. It's kind of like intermingled and it's crazy, but a human being was not created for this kind of pressure. Whether that is your spouse, whether it is a friend that you are putting it in, whether it is your, whoever, it's your boss. People are not created to carry that kind of weight. And we do it to them all the time. Now, I'm
Right.
curious, when you were talking about control, Tammy, I think control is one of the places where we can recognize it's an indicator that maybe we are putting our hope in people or in the opinions of others rather than just loving them. What are some ways that maybe somebody could identify that they might be trying to control? How does that show up?
Well, ladies, honestly, if you find yourself nagging them a lot with the same repeated thing over and over and over, and they are resisting and they're saying, that's not who I am. That's not me. That's not what I want. But you keep trying to get them there, then that might be a cue that we're controlling. When I first heard that I was controlling, I was like, what in the world are you talking about? I'm just trying to help you. So innocent, right? But I had to confront the whole idea that I wanted them to look a certain way so that I would get approval. And I wounded them, my husband, my daughters, and I've had to do repair work around that and continue sometimes.
It's funny because I do the controlling even around the dishwasher. There's a way to do it. I do the controlling. I got called controlling by my family with when we go on camping trips. Remember, I am not a wilderness woman, though I like to dwell here on camping trips. I like to make sure that everything that we can control the situation. I want to make sure every item that we could pack. And so I like squeeze the joy sometimes out of the adventure, the control. And for me, what I feel like I want to say to a woman listening that maybe you recognize you have a lot of control, but you don't know how to course correct here.
Okay.
For me, what I had to do was, first of all, I had to acknowledge that I was controlling. And rather than taking that as, I guess, shame bait is what I would call it, is like, you're falling short again. There you are being controlling. It's trying to figure out, okay, I acknowledge I'm being controlling. And it's applying curiosity here. Why am I being controlling? what is going on here? What am I bumping into? And you can hear some of that in what Tammy has shared is she was bumping into what other people thought, and that helped her to kind of to release that. For me, I was actually bumping into I was trying to stay safe. And that would be kind of strange. Like you're just going out to the woods. Do you really need to feel safe? Well, you know what? You and I might beg to differ. There are bears and there are, you know, a lot of scary things out there, mosquitoes and stuff. But I was trying to stay safe. And that was my little girl internal experience flaring itself. And so control was a way that I felt like I could stay safe. That was a huge aha moment. I'm so thankful I was called controlling so that I could get underneath that. And so I just felt like I wanted to say that to the woman that realizes she is controlling. Just get curious there. And you don't got to do that alone. You can go to counseling for this, find a friend because most women can probably relate at some levels to being controlling every now and then, right?
Or get some coaching.
It will help you with it. And it's so funny. Tammy and I always have this expression, we're not experts, we're guides. And then as we were playing with that, we were like, wait a minute, you know, there's a such thing as like the school of hard knocks. And the reason that Tammy and I feel like we can guide people through things like control is because God had to reveal in us that we were controlling and all of the many different reasons. That's why we can talk to you about hope duds. We've had all of the many different ways that we have placed our hope in something that was not God. So that is what gives us street cred. So we are kind of experts in a sense of the way. Like we're gangsta guides.
No, you can be that. But not that I'm not that cool, right? But it made me think, Sunny, about the woman who is listening, who maybe was the kid who felt like they disappointed their parents and they weren't enough, or they embarrassed their parents, or that kind of thing. And so, ladies, if you're listening here, which I'm pretty sure you are, seriously, you are a treasure. You are loved. You are valued. I'm sorry that you felt like a disappointment, that you feel like that. I'm sorry that your parents' fears and need for approval and their hopes and dreams overshadowed yours. And you can continue to heal, and you can continue to step into who you were designed to be. We want to help with that. But first and foremost, I just want to say I'm sorry and know that God knew you, knows you, and loves you and wants to see you step fully into who you are created to be, not who somebody else thought you should be. As a matter of fact, I was reading Psalm 139 this morning, and it's coming to mind. I just want to share it with you because it's in this translation, the Passion Translation, that it just resonated different. And it said, Lord, you know everything there is to know about me. You perceive every movement of my heart and soul, and you understand my very thought before it even enters my mind. You're so intimately aware of me, Lord. You read my heart like an open book, and you know all the words I'm about to speak before I even start a sentence. You know every step I will take before my journey even begins. You've gone into my future to prepare the way, and in kindness, you follow behind me to spare me from the harm of my past. You have laid hand on me. This is just too wonderful, deep, and incomprehensible. Your understanding of me brings me wonder and strength.
It's beautiful. I want to add to what you were saying that I just feel for that woman. That was too much pressure for you to hold. You cannot uphold your parents, their worth. It's too much for a child. And I bet that that has led you in your adult life to shouldering more than you need to shoulder, being the strong one and the tough one, where my prayer is that you will find places you can let your guard down because God can shoulder the burden. He has way bigger shoulders. And you were never designed to shoulder that. And I can just feel with such tenderness right now to the woman that this is landing on. I wish you were right here where we could see your face. I think this was a tender moment. I thank you for bringing that ministry to this moment here, Tammy, because this is a big topic. When we put our hope in relationships or other people put their hope in us as that relationship, either way, it will leave people disappointed because it's too big of a weight. And we could go in so many different ways, just to, I guess, tie it in a pretty red bow. When it comes to this area of placing our hope, this is often about our performance, our kids' performance or our performance. And the other thing I think of is I had a lot of my hope wrapped up in being able to be the mood manager. That's the way that's the way that my hope is placed in other people. It's not just in them, it's in their moods. If I can keep them happy and hopeful, then I'm good, right? Now, I picked that up a very long time ago in my story, but I remember this entering into my world. God forced me this year. And I wish, I guess I can't say this is just hindsight. This is something I'm actively trying to grow through, and it is an active conversation in my home in that I got a child who suffers with chronic illness. And the truth is that I wanted to make her feel better. And I went through the insanity of put this on your feet, stand on your head, do this, do that, it'll make it better. And when none of those things made her physical symptoms better, if I could just make her heart better by making her see Jesus, that he had a bigger story for her, all of this, and it was just too much for her. The pressure to have to be happy for me, it was toxic positivity. I was attempting to bring hope, but it was with a weird paintbrush because it wasn't hope. It was my need for her to be happy. And I think that while I'm talking about a child, I think that we do this a lot. We need to keep our husband happy, our boss happy, our children happy, everyone happy. And I am not Mary Poppins. I cannot do that. And those of you who know me know you're like, yeah, you might lean more towards negative Nelly than Mary Poppins. But gosh, I'd love to say it's codependency on some levels. But for me, it resonates more of saying the mood manager or the happy fixer, I don't know. Can you relate to that? Did you ever feel that pressure, Tammy?
Oh, yes, so much. But what started shifting this in me is I went and watched Inside Out. Number one, and Joy on there, she is the mood manager. And she is just bringing the joy and everything. And then you have sadness, right? And she is so annoyed with sadness. And she like dragging around and doing all this stuff. And I'm just like, right. You know, and I sat there and I'm like, oh my gosh, I am acting like Joy. And the moment comes in the movie, it's way old enough that you guys, this is a spoiler alert, I'm sorry. But go watch the movie, right? But there comes this moment that reveals how sadness helped Riley. And Joy gets to see that. And all of a sudden it's, oh my gosh, grief helps us sometimes. Anger helps us sometimes, and all these other emotions are meant to help us sometimes. And being the mood manager, being Joy, can really short circuit people's health and growth and all of those things when we think that we're doing a good thing. And so that's what comes to my mind. And I didn't realize how that was affecting others around me because I'm always like, well, let's look for the good in this. Let's look for the win. Let's look for the positive. Those kinds of things. And so, yeah, that movie really did it for me.
And this tendency of ours, this short circuiting that you're talking about, I want to short circuit my daughter and my children's suffering. And yet through suffering, it might actually be where they encounter God. And so we kind of have this like toxic positivity language in our home of that feels like toxic positivity. Or my daughter would regularly just say to me, let me feel. Let me feel. And I was like, well, of course you can feel. I'm just trying to have an upper perspective. See God with the feelings. That's not what she needed. What healthy relationship looks like. If I am looking at my daughter to make or break me, or if I am looking at my husband or my whoever to make or break me, and if they are not happy, I cannot deal. I am not comfortable. I can't regulate myself. Then you have placed your hope in something that is not God. It is a dud. So that might be an indicator. How comfortable are you navigating other people's big feelings? Are you like, that's just their feeling? Can I sit with them in them? Jesus taught us the fellowship of suffering, fellowship of difficulty, sitting with people in their hard, not fixing it. And so I hope this has brought like an awareness. If not, you guys got to read my journal today. You're welcome. But Tammy, I also want to talk about a little sticky subject because I think that to bring this well-rounded in the way that we put our hope in relationship, I think we really need to go there when it comes to the church. And I'm going to put a little disclaimer on this, okay? For some of you out there listening, the church is a place that is really difficult. And some of you are bearing stories that because of how you watched the church handle something, you have struggled to even believe in God. And you have struggled in ever wanting anything to do with church. And I want to say that Tammy and I both, as we go into this conversation, we're navigating with tenderness as we go here, knowing the stories that some of you hold. And also, I want to acknowledge that there are people listening that the church has been a source of great joy. It has brought purpose to your life. It has helped you sense family, and it has been a place that there is life. And so as we have this conversation, let's make space for both. The church is a place where we see beauty in brokenness, where we see humanity and we see dysfunction, but where we also see people being made whole, coming to Christ. And so Tammy and I, in any place where we are talking about the church ever, we are holding both of those in mind. And anything you'd like to say to kind of disclaim this before we walk in?
Yes, I totally agree with you that it's the both. It's both and, right? So there is beauty there. There is relationship and connection and all of those things that can be deeply helpful and healing and all of those things. And there is a lot of humanity. And it is a building, a place full of people who are wrestling to figure out life. And I don't care if they're on the platform or if they are sitting next to you in one of the seats. There is a lot of humanity there. And a lot of times we use that humanity to judge who God is, right? And so this is an important topic.
And of course, because when you're walking into God's house, that's what you like. I'm going to church. It's God's house. Of course, we might be tempted to put our hope in people in this group called church. And so that's why we felt like we needed to go here today is the church is a place where, yes, it's the humanity. And since there's humanity, there's a lot of people with a lot of hope duds in the room. And I'm one of them. So all of that to say, Tammy, what about the woman she has been disillusioned by the church and maybe she was looking to the church to be a family, but it turned out to be something different. And I'll go first here with just a little bit in that, I worked for a church for a very long time and I was aware that it was my job, but I really believed it was family. And as a part of that, I wanted to believe that I was irreplaceable in that family because a family member is a family member, always a family member, right? So even if they're not at dinner one night, they're family. And in my experience, what I walked through was I suddenly had this disillusionment that it was more like a business in a moment where I was replaceable right away. And I know I want to have a heart. It shouldn't be built around me, but I wanted to always be cared for and feel like I had a seat at that table and that I mattered to that group of people. And when I ended up shifting outside of that, I had people just they wouldn't even look at me at Walmart. People who I was breaking bread with the week before, and the next week I was like, "Do I smell? What did I do?" And it was yeah, it was really hard. That was one of the hardest hope duds I've ever experienced was what I put in the church and in my place in the church, and I think that there was a bit of an identity crisis after that. So but what about you? I mean, what would you say to that girl, or do you have your own experience here, or
Oh, I have my own experiences, several actually. But first of all, I was thinking when you were talking before you shared yours, I was thinking about maybe you've never been to church and you don't want to go to church because you've seen all these TV things, right? You've seen all the news reports of all the corruption and all of that kind of thing. And you're like, I don't need any of that. I'm staying far away. And so I just want to say, I get it. There is a lot of messed up people in the church doing some harmful things. But a while back, I heard this stat that has stuck with me, and that was we see this 3% gets highlighted of people that are really screwing up bad and really hurting people. That means that there's 97% that are not doing that. But we focus on the 3% saying, I don't want anything to do with that because of those people. And so I do want to say that word of caution, I guess. And likewise, then moving on to like if you had a harder time in your family and you felt disconnected from your family in some way for some reason, or rejected by your family or anything. I've walked alongside a lot of women who have experienced lots of different variations of this. And I have my own stories as well. But anyway, so you're feeling that and then you want a family. And so you go to church because you've heard this is where you can find people that are nice and kind and loving and all of these things. And you can find those people there. So you go and you're like, I'm going to build this family that I never had, that I never experienced, or that I'm lacking, or whatever. And you go there to build that family and you pour in. And then all of a sudden, things change and you say, this isn't working for me anymore. I either want to go to a different church, I need to take a pause, whatever the case is, and you step away. It is deeply rejecting. It is deeply wounding when the people that you were just with a week ago, a month ago, whatever, no longer talk to you. They unfriend you on social media and they unfriend you in the store, like Sunny was talking about. That is deeply painful. And I want to say we have enough love to go around. And we can share love with people, whether they're in the same building with us or not. And I'm pretty passionate and sometimes a little hot about this topic because I have been wounded by that. I didn't unfriend people, but I got unfriended. But more importantly, I'm hot about this because for you, I think it's wrong. I don't think you should be treated that way, whether you attend a certain building or not. And I think that Jesus is heartbroken over this. And I think that honestly, he's ticked off about it. And Sunny, you and I talk about this, and I get really upset about this. And I think that God is upset about this. This is never what he intended. And so this whole deconstructing thing that is going on, people are walking away from Jesus because how they have been treated by the church is deeply heartbreaking to me. And we have put our hope in the people that are saying, here, let me point you to God, and then they fail you. And yet Jesus is going, well, I'm right here. That is not who I am. And that makes me mad, or that breaks my heart. I am so sorry for your loss. And so I
yeah.
don't want us to put our hope in the people, especially just the people on the platform. They're going to fail us. We're going to fail each other. And we don't pin our hope to the people. but to God.
I love this quote from Alicia Britt Chole. She said, "Our true hope is not in the family of God, but in the God of the family." And I think that sometimes when we go, "You're right, Sonny, I'm not putting my hope in the church anymore. That's why I don't go." I don't necessarily feel, and I get it. Like, I get it. I lived there and I get it. But there is such beauty in the church, and I think that there are a couple of course corrections here. The first of all, it is not putting your hope in people, okay? Not, and this next place of giving these course corrections, what I hope you do not hear is that in any way am I excusing things that have been hard at church, okay? Because the family of God should be set apart and different. And we, his kids, should act different. And we don't get to pin that on the pastor on the platform. That is a body thing. It is a, if you see a woman who you used to go to church with, but she doesn't go to your church anymore, for goodness sakes, embrace her and love her and say hello. Send her a text message, reach out to her. She is still a part of the family of God, even if she has different beliefs than you. But I also want to say, I had this big awakening after my church hurt story. So my daughter was in dance, follow me for a minute, and my daughter got sick. She could no longer go to dance. Well, we were there 5 days a week. We were a part of the dance family. When my daughter got sick and was no longer there, that family didn't talk to us anymore. We weren't in communication with them. But there was something different. I didn't expect that family of dance to reach out to me because we were no longer paying to be a part of it. We expect the church to be different when honestly, I think the people who didn't see me at Walmart, maybe they actually didn't see me. I don't know. Maybe they did and they were misbehaving. I don't know. God knows. But perhaps when people that you have placed your hope in, perhaps the reason they're not talking to you is because they're just going to church on Sunday still and they're part of the thing. And it's not that they've forgotten you because of your worth. It's because they don't see you in the regular place that they go. Maybe it's not as personal as it sometimes feels. And I remember experiencing that. Also, when there is a break in the family, I just want you to think of a dynamic of two parents who get divorced. Sometimes if somebody leaves a church because something hard happened, when there is a divorce, the kids always don't know how to act around their parents. Should I talk about the dad? Should I talk about my mom? That's just the awkwardness that we wade in family issues. And so, again, maybe the way people are behaving is not about you. If your hope is not in them, though, and your hope is in the God of the family, then that is the place we can begin to experience grace for humanity. It is the place where I don't have to control people's reactions to me, their acceptance of me. I can let them have their own experience of the breaking apart of the family because my hope is in God, the one who has sat with me in the fellowship of my suffering, who has held my wounds, who has dried my tears, who has never left me and never treated me that way. And I'm going to tell you, Tammy, when I put my hope in the church and in my spot in that church, it is the place where I felt the most isolated and the most alone when I stepped outside of. But it is the place where I experienced and encountered God so deeply that I don't think I would ever rewrite that story a different way because of the places that I know my Father now. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And I've had some of that, but I also had the challenge of feeling like my prayers were hitting the ceiling and not landing because I felt that disconnection for a bit. So I've experienced both the distance and the healing and the him being with me. And I know that ladies out here are feeling that same thing. And it's not just the church too. That can happen when you leave a job, the job that you've invested in and everything too. And you put your hope in that and your career and all that kind of stuff, and things change and you can't do that career anymore, or you choose not to, and all of that. And you step back from that, and those same kinds of things can happen. And the same thing, you can decide if you're going to put your hope in that career, in that job, or are you going to put it in the God who knows you, who sees you, who wants to guide you through the transition.
And that's such a great place to focus here, Tammy, because we've talked about a lot of things today, a lot of places that we've put our hope in people. And earlier, I do not want to end this without a discussion we had before we got started, because I think it's a tangible tool for people, is that when we go back to where we started, that a lot of the reasons we place our hope in people is because of the ideals of what we thought something would look like, the dreams that we had, the dreams that we had of the church, of our children, of our friendships, of whatever. And you talked about a tangible tool of how you are naming these dreams and the process you go through. Would you share that? Because I think it's a great course correction for people.
Yeah. And that was a really important lesson and tool for me to learn and begin to utilize. And I still try to do it today. But gosh, probably 15 years ago or something. And I was so disappointed about the death of the dream that I had for my family. And so it was like, God was like, yeah, let's just name that. Let's get that out in the open. You had these dreams. Let's name those. What were those dreams? And so naming that with God, and then even with a friend, I did this with a friend too. And then from that, it was, so how about you grieve that? And I was like, but it's not reality. It was just something in my head. And it was like, no, because that's what you were building toward. And now I just want you to pause and I want you to acknowledge and grieve that it's not going to happen. And then he asked me to do something that I was not thrilled about. And that was to have a funeral for those dreams. And I literally got a little black file folder box and put some of those dreams in there that I was naming and grieving. And then I had a funeral for those and released it and said, that's never going to be the case. And so I'm going to let this go. And so that I could accept what is and be present with my family in what is and love them for who they are, not just who I wanted them to be or I wanted our family to be or those kinds of things. And that creeps up every once in a while. But that tool is right there for me to grab onto, name it, grieve it, release it, do that funeral, and accept what is.
So let's say a woman takes you up on this. And in this process, I can almost feel, maybe I'm not talking about a woman, maybe I'm talking about myself. But so she goes to bury those dreams that she had, but nothing about those dreams felt selfish. It felt like a great God-honoring desire. How do we bury those and actually find hope? Because that could trigger anger, injustice of, are you good, God? Because I have to bury this. Talk to me around the person that's having that internal response.
Yeah. So I'm going to talk to you, Sunny.
What?
And when I say bury, I'm not talking about the bury, pretend like it's not there. I'm saying just like picture a funeral. And part of grief is anger. Part of grief is bargaining. Part of grief is the crying and the denial and all of those. That's all part of grief. It's okay to grieve those things. But we can't force other people or coerce them into living our dream. That's not love. And so, even though they were God honoring and good things, maybe they're not their things. And so, if I love someone, I'm going to release them to live their life, to do their things, and love and support them in the midst. And it's a challenge when you have those strong ideals. And sometimes we can't be all that for them. We were never intended to be. And so it is, God, here's what I thought life would be. This was the dream. And I can spend my time being bitter or I can get better. And just like you said before, when you know better, do better, it is that even though this was good, it may not be for them. That doesn't mean I can't keep pursuing the dreams that God has placed in me as a human being, but I can't force my family into it.
Yeah.
That's not love.
And this is so this is almost a funeral for a hope dead.
Yeah.
And what do we stand to gain by doing this process? We're talking about the death of it and the difficulty, but what do we stand to gain by entering in?
Oh, gosh. That brings excitement because to me, I have been able to love my family in a more genuine way. And whether they reciprocate in the ways that I want, like you were talking about your husband earlier, but I can't help. This is not a made up phrase. This is that wide open, spacious life. They get to live more wide open, spacious. I get to live more wide open, spacious. And I get excited about that. It's hard when you're releasing it, but you're holding on to something that's not going to happen. So you get to release that and then grab onto what is and learn how to move about the cabin with that rather than being upset and angry and resentful. And you don't have that weight anymore. You get to explore new things. You get to open your mind up to different things because you're not stuck on this one thing that had you tethered there.
And what if we're white knuckling a dream and we allow it to die? What if God has infinitely more than you dare ask, think, or imagine because you let Him shape your life? You let Him shape your dreams. You let Him define your hope. And this is why we have the wild hope is rising. Honestly, when we release the duds, sometimes we don't see the hope right away, but it is rising. And ironically, it's rising right after you put the dud to death. So put the dud to death and let hope rise.
Yeah. Yeah. And like you said, it's not always instantaneous, but it begins to build. And so even tune into that building, rising of curiosity and hope and all,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And speaking of letting it build, I'm feeling like at the end here, we could have a really cool song that we could play that you and I just write like a little ditty together that is just, and we let hope rise, it's bigger than our thighs. Mine are big. I'm telling you, if hope could be bigger than my thighs, we would all rejoice. I'm just saying. And hope is messy. So are my thighs. I mean, talk to me about the dimples from midlife. I like it. Dimples are evidence of a smile. I'm just saying, this is the perfect ending song, is it not, Tammy?
Yeah, as long as you sing it.
Yeah. Let hope rise bigger than your thighs. Thanks for listening to Wild Hope Rising. My prayer is freedom will become your story and redemption your song. Now it's time to take hope-filled action. And if today's episode spoke to you, please don't keep it to yourself. Like, subscribe, and share, and help us grow this community. Thanks for listening to Wild Hope Rising. Until next time, keep stepping boldly into the spacious life you were created for.